real, because I still don't think I was willing to claim it full on. Like if I was at this talk in, 2003, I think I would be going, well, I'm not really a musician, but I'm on tour all the time, so I don't know if I would have felt terribly worthy of it. And I don't know, you gotta kind of punch the shit out of yourself sometimes to feel worthy of it. It's like you gotta beat yourself up to feel good about yourself, which is a really weird thing. But it's like, come on, man. It's not like you worked any less hard than anyone else just because you weren't, studying classical violin, You've been to a lot of truck stop bathrooms, and that's gotta count for something. It's gotta add up to points.
Can you remember a moment or a time when you realized that your voice was unique? Because you started out as a drummer, punk bands, and then became a singer, or frontwoman. Do you remember what that realization was when you were like, oh, my voice is unique, good, if ever?
I think it was, I always wanted to be a singer. I don't know that I thought it was good so much as I just had such a burning desire and an obsessive need to do it. Like I did it in the house way more than I do now. Just because I wanted it so bad. It was a compulsion. It wasn't, come home from work, turn on records and sing to them really loud. And I don't know how I got away with that because I lived in apartments. I think I had some elderly neighbors that were kind of deaf, and so I wish I could take them a box of cookies right now and go, thank you for putting up with me.
Where did you live when you lived in Chicago?
I lived in Humboldt Park at the time.
Okay.
In the I lived on Maplewood, and I loved it. It was kind of brutal, but I loved it.
It's a beautiful park. That area is so nice.
Yeah, and I lived a lot closer to Western than I did to the park. It was like between Division and North on Maplewood. So on one hand, there would be old dudes wearing suits on the hottest day of the year playing dominoes with each other, and people saying hello, and kids riding their bikes, and on the other hand, there were people blowing each other's heads off and, blowing on everyone's windshields at night. So it was a really hairy yet beautiful place to be. I do miss it a lot.
You've talked about the song Star Witness, I think, being inspired by that time. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it was, people would get shot, and it was such a commonplace occurrence that the police don't even put their sirens on. They get there really fast, but they don't put their sirens on. And most of the people who were killed were young black men, so they wouldn't end up in the paper until it was just like however many people were killed statistically.
Right, which is still...
It was really sad, and it really hurt, because in those apartment buildings, you can hear every single thing that happens on the street and in your neighbor's apartment. Like, you can hear everything that happens. It's like you're all living in the same house. And I remember one day, we were loading up to go on tour, and there was a family that lived across the street, and John and Tom were putting stuff in the back of the van, and I was in the living room packing something into a bag, and some people drove by and they shot a young man to death across the road. And
as you were packing up?
As we were packing, so they hit the ground, everything slowed down, and you just heard this, take that motherfucker, and all the shooting, and this poor guy was dead immediately. His sisters and mother came running out and were freaking out and shrieking, and the ambulance was there really fast, no sirens. It was really eerie, and they're just screaming, don't let him die, don't let him die. And I'll never forget that. It's weird, I don't feel worthy to talk about it on one hand, but on the other hand, this kid had just come home from college and was there to see his mom for a day. And he got shot to death because these kids thought he was someone else. But the someone else didn't deserve to die either. It's just like, it was just one of those things that happens all the fucking time.
Yeah.
And that was the same neighborhood I lived in Tacoma, Washington as well. You know, those things happened every single day. And nothing was really done about it, or for it, or with it, or to it. Anything, just numbers. And you know, like I said, the police got there fast, and the ambulance got there fast. Like, they did not hesitate in their response, yet it just seemed odd to me that there was no sirens. Like, does that mean this isn't an emergency? Like, is that an attack? I don't understand.
Yeah.
But I will never forget the sounds of his mother and sisters losing their minds. I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
And what can you say about it, other than it just happens all the time?
Yeah. It still does, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little.
Yeah, now that I'm crying.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Let's go back to the box set then. When you were going through the process of kind of remastering and revisiting your discography, your career, were there any songs that you had any surprises, anything unexpected come up, like, oh, this song is great, or this song is terrible, things like that?
No, because I wasn't listening for the songs, I was listening for the mastering, which, it's funny, like sometimes you hear your own song so many times, like some people ask me that, and they're like, what, do you go back and listen? What do you think? Mm-hmm. I always hear the production, but I don't hear the songs. I'll be like, oh, that still sounds okay. Okay, that was fine. Okay, good. That was fine, you know, but there's a weird thing that happens, like, you know, when you stare at something too long and you close your eyes and the shape of that thing is still there, but it's the opposite color on the color wheel. It's like your cones or whatever in your eyes that see color becomes saturated. So they change it to the opposite color to take the strain off themselves. Like, music can do the same thing, or sounds can do the same thing, where they wear a groove in your brain, and so there's just kind of like this witness protection blackout over where your voice should be. So some of the songs, I could actually hear them again, and that was like, ooh, that's shocking. But I was just glad that some of, like, pretty much from Fox Confessor on, things still sounded consistent to me. So I was pleased about that. And of course, it was a thrill to hear my friend Peter remaster the stuff, because, you know, he came up mastering vinyl and has done that as well. He's one of those people that has been working in that business for so long, he can tell you what brand of audio tape it is by smelling it.
Wow.
Like, he is so in deep, and he, you know, he mastered lots of records for bands like The Band, like for Bob Dylan and stuff, and 70s fidelity and that super smooth caramelly sound that gets in you, you know, that vibration with the really beautiful low end that's equally satisfying if you hear it in a room or if you hear it on headphones. He's kind of a master of that, so I was thrilled that he wanted to redo them, so it was exciting for that reason. For an audio nerd pornography time, that was probably the highlight.
When you've been going back, or kind of, or in general, what accomplishment do you look back on your career that you're most proud of, would you say?
I'm most proud of the fact that I pretty much understand every aspect of the business, because I really had to learn it and I had to do it myself. And I didn't do it myself alone. That sounds very self-aggrandizing, which it's not, because I didn't. If I had gotten what I really wanted when I was about 22 years old or 24 years old, which was to get a major label contract, I wouldn't have probably learned enough. And I am kind of an anomaly in that I own my own masters, which is a really important thing to do. And I was told by my attorney that that would never happen. But I held out and it worked. So when people tell you things are impossible, they're not necessarily impossible if you can manage to value your work enough and manage to be nice about it at the same time. Like, you don't have to be like the stereotype of the music industry asshole that is out there, which is just as harmful to the music industry assholes as it is to the musicians. Like, it really puts us on opposing teams, but you don't have to be that way. And so, I learned everything about it, and I know what people have to do certain jobs, and it's really difficult, and most of the things that go into making a rock and roll touring band don't get you any sort of thanks or acclaim, so you gotta treat your crew and your coworkers really well and make sure that they're happy, and you gotta mean it. You can't just be like, okay, thank you. Like, people know, you gotta care, because it's easy to care if you remember what it's like to have to book that tour and spend all that time on the phone and be exhausted and, get screwed out of money and threaten to beat up dudes and, all those things that you think do happen. And the stuff that doesn't happen is there's no glamour at all, unless you pay for it and make it look that way, which, most bands and most people who play music or make art, they don't live that way at all. That's just kind of a fantasy.
Yeah.
That I guess if you're, Britney Spears or somebody like that, or Michael Jackson, you have the money to do that and to project that image, or Mariah Carey, but that's not really what happens ever. So it's funny, some people think if you end up in an interview that you are loaded. You were in Rolling Stone? Oh my God, you must be so wealthy.
Hence the truck driver, gladiator, mule title.
Yeah, I wanted to pay tribute to all the years of, slogging along, not just by myself, but with the help of a lot of people who did it because they love music. And so that's a big deal to me. And I don't know what, I wouldn't be here without them, so.
So we have time for just a little more, I think about 5 more minutes. I just want to talk a little bit about your non-musical life.
Mm-hmm.
You live on a farm in Vermont, and it's a working farm, right?
Yeah, most of the time it is.
You grow tomatoes and things. Can you tell us about what that's like?
That's kind of the greatest thing on earth in a way. I come from farming families.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always just really felt comfortable in that environment. I really do much better as a human being and a human animal if I'm out in the woods a lot, or if I'm just touching some dirt. I guess I'm a very basic person. And I'm a very physical person, so doing those kind of things that, help you accomplish really basic things make me feel a lot more sane. They're very good for my mental health and well-being, just on a very, baseline level.
And you have a lot of pets, right?
Well, I have less now because they're really old, so they're kind of dying off. It's like the age of the dinosaurs over my house right now. And it sounds horrible, but the animals that have passed away, they did have really excellent senses of humor, so they were.
No, in the liner, in the booklet for the box set, there's a really gnarly shot of stitches on an animal. What's the story with that?
Well, that was my dog Liza that was actually from her having a tumor removed that turned out to be her conjoined twin.
What?
There was this lump on her that was growing, and I was like, she's got dog cancer. We gotta get her to the vet. And so the vet...
How old was she?
She was I don't know, I think she was 10 at the time.
She had a conjoined twin for 10 days. That's
Well, yeah, but I think that something had got it. She was one of those dogs with kind of that really fatty, oily under hair. She was part chow, so her hair's really oily and thick, and some hair got in there and kind of was infected or something, or her body just said, "Get that off me," because those fatty dogs, they get those bumps every now and again. But so I was all worried that it was going to be cancer. I've had a lot of dogs with cancer, and my vet called me and he said, "Oh, actually, it was a ball of teeth and hair materials."
Oh my God.
The first thing I said was, "Do you have it? Can I see it?" He was like, "No, we don't have it." I was kind of mad at him that they incinerate it or whatever they do with conjoined dogs.
Exercise.
Yeah. I really wanted to see that. I'm sure it would have been disgusting, but
Wow.
So she was fine, obviously, but
Wow. Well, that's
yeah.
amazing. So